Chapter 884. Yi Xing and the other three destroyed the five-colored light barrier as easily as crushing dry weeds. It didn't take long for them to arrive outside the five-colored light barrier. Bang, 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 bang. The attacks of the four landed on the five-colored light shield one after another, causing a series of explosions. Something strange happened. Under the attacks of Yi Xing and the other three, the formation could not withstand a single blow. However, the five-colored light barrier rippled and blocked the attacks of the four people. Even Yi Xing's arrow attack was blocked and could not penetrate it. Star-Silver Death stood in the sky above Xianxia Palace, looking at Yi Xing and the other three through the translucent five-colored light shield. He snorted. "I have said that you will never be able to break through my Xianxia Palace. This five elements heaven ceiling formation is a complete level 6 formation. It is a treasure that the founder of my sect obtained from the Dark Star continent. It can withstand the attack of a quasi-god third nirvana. It has been guarding the center of the palace and can ensure that my Xianxia Palace will exist forever in the starry crescent land. You will not be able to break through this formation." Feng Hanqiu frowned. A complete level 6 formation was too difficult to deal with. It had already exceeded the limits of the starry crescent land. In the starry crescent land, the cultivation of a martial artist could only reach the level of a quasi-god third nirvana. The imperial dragon luck that they had accumulated was also at the peak of a quasi-god third nirvana. Under normal circumstances, a formation that could withstand a quasi-god third nirvana was indeed impossible to break through in the starry crescent land. However, this was not a normal situation. Yi Xing and Wei Qingxian were not from the starry crescent land. Yi Xing's strength had exceeded the martial arts limits of the starry crescent land. However, with Yi Xing's quasi-god third nirvana level attack, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through the five elements heaven ceiling formation. Even a quasi-god fourth nirvana would need a certain amount of time to break through a level 6 formation. If the array was supplied with energy, it would be even more difficult to break the array. Inside the five-colored light shield, Star-Silver Death sneered and continued. "This formation uses the primordial chi of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth as its energy source. When we first established this formation, our founder left behind a method to gather the primordial chi of 5 elements. After more than 78,000 years of accumulation, the amount of primordial chi of 5 elements that we have gathered is beyond your imagination. You want to exhaust the formation's energy to break it? You can attack it for 100 years, or even 1,000 years, but you won't be able to break it." Feng Hanqiu looked at Yi Xing anxiously. "What should we do? If the five-element sky seal formation had enough power to last for thousands of years, then it would be unbreakable. Just like Star-Silver Death had said, it would be a competition to see who could live longer." Yi Xing, on the other hand, was confident and composed. He looked at Feng Hanqiu and smiled. "It doesn't matter. Even if I can't break it by force now, I'll definitely be able to break it when I become a 9-star king. However, who said that one must break the array by force?" Feng Hanqiu's eyes lit up and his face lit up. "Oh, junior brother Arrow Emperor knows about arrays?" Wei Qingxian smiled. Yi Xing's attainments in arrays are not low. More importantly, his eye technique can see through everything. No array can hide anything from him. If there is a flaw, it won't escape Yi Xing's eyes. Yi Xing smiled and nodded. He activated the God Voidbreaker Eye, and a third eye opened in the center of his forehead. The God Voidbreaker Eye's gaze instantly pierced through the void. The structure of the five-element sky seal formation was clearly visible under the God Voidbreaker Eye. Yi Xing understood it clearly. Yi Xing carefully examined the structure of the five-element sky seal formation. He was secretly surprised that he couldn't find a flaw in this array. It was a level 6 array. The killing array could kill quasi-gods, the defensive array could defend against quasi-gods, and the trapping array could trap quasi-gods. It wasn't simple at all. Yi Xing also found a few weak points in the array. However, this five-element sky seal formation contained the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The 5 elements were clearly separated on the surface, but they were actually connected. No matter which part of the formation was attacked, the attack would immediately be directed to the 5 elements of the light shield and shared. Therefore, even if there was a weak point in the array, it was impossible to penetrate the defense of the 5 elements of the light shield in one strike. Moreover, the 5-element sky seal formation circulated the 5 elements of the formation and had a self-healing effect. If it couldn't be broken in one strike, the circulating 5 elements of the formation would immediately heal the damaged area. Only a quasi-god 4 Nirvana level of attack could possibly break this array if they attacked continuously. A quasi-god 3 Nirvana level of attack would have a slim chance of breaking the array unless the array's energy was insufficient. However, even if the chances were slim, they still had to give it a try. After all, Yi Xing's archery contained extremely terrifying penetrative power. Its lethality was much more terrifying than that of an ordinary quasi-god 3 Nirvana level of attack. Yi Xing once again drew the green sandalwood divine bow and activated the gray flame void-destroying arrow technique. A pale flame arrow formed and targeted a weak point in the array where the 5 elements of the formation circulated slowly. At this moment, Yi Xing was the focus of everyone's attention. Wei Qingxian, Feng Hanqiu, and Feng Juanyue's eyes were filled with anticipation. However, Star Silver Death and Xingyihong's eyes were slightly worried. They were afraid that something would go wrong because the 5-element sky seal formation was their last resort. Whoosh! The arrow left the bowstring and instantly pierced through the void. Everyone's attention shifted from Yi Xing to the flaming arrow at the same time. Everyone's eyes were filled with anticipation. On one hand, they hoped that the flame arrow could break the array, and on the other hand, they hoped that the array light shield could block the arrow. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the flame arrow collided with the 5-color array light shield, causing a loud explosion. Yi Xing's arrow was an all-out attack. Its power was much more terrifying than the previous one. The tip of the arrow pierced through the surface of the 5-colored light shield and pierced into it. Unfortunately, the 5-colored light shield had 5 layers of defense. The 5 elements of the primordial qi circulated, and the penetrative power was quickly diverted away. In the end, the arrow only penetrated 3 layers of defense before it could no longer move forward. The surging flame energy exploded, and its power erupted instantly. It broke through another layer of defense, but the last layer of defense was still unshakable. This was Yi Xing's most powerful attack, and the attack was aimed at the weakest point of the array. However, it still couldn't break the array in one strike. The 5 elements of the primordial qi circulated, and the 4 layers of defense that had been broken through were restored in the blink of an eye. Wei Qingxian and the others were disappointed. However, Star Silver Death was overjoyed. He felt relieved. Star Silver Death chuckled. Yi Xing, how's the defensive power of the 5 elements heaven sealing formation? You've already used your most powerful attack, right? Unfortunately, it's still not enough. This array is maintained by an endless stream of 5 elements of primordial qi. If you can't break it with one strike, I won't be able to break it even if I give you 1,000 years. Ha! Although Xinxiang Palace was only left with a radius of 100 miles, the central area was only protected by the 5 elements heaven sealing formation. As a member of Xinxiang Palace, this should be a shameful thing. However, Star Silver Death was inexplicably happy to see Yi Xing being defeated by the 5 elements heaven sealing formation. Today, I have a lot of work to do at my relative's house. I only wrote 2 chapters for now. I'll work hard tomorrow when I return to Shenyang. Chapter 885. Star Silver Death's words reminded Yi Xing that if the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation wanted to protect Xinxiang Palace, it needed an endless supply of 5 elemental yuan qi. The 5 elemental heaven sealing formation was extremely difficult to break because the 5 elemental yuan qi was too dense. Without it, the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation's power would be greatly reduced. Even now, Yi Xing could rely on his extreme penetrative power to break through 4 layers of defense. As long as the 5 elemental heaven sealing formation's power was weakened, it wouldn't be difficult to break through. Yi Xing lowered his head and used his God Voidbreaker eye to look underground. Not even the dirt and sand could obstruct the God Voidbreaker eye's vision. Soon, Yi Xing could see the entire underground of the 5 elemental heaven ceiling formation. The scene underground caused Yi Xing's eyes to light up, and his lips curled into a smile. 100 li below Xianxia Palace, there were 5 enormous elemental yuan qi pools arranged in a pentagram. Each elemental yuan qi pool was about 30 li long, 30 li wide, and 30 li high. They were set up with an array that gathered elemental yuan qi of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Each elemental yuan qi pool gathered one type of yuan qi. After tens of thousands of years of accumulation, the yuan qi in the 5 elemental yuan qi pools had reached a terrifying level. The yuan qi had condensed into yuan liquid, which in turn condensed into yuan crystals. Each elemental yuan qi pool was half a pool of yuan crystal and half a pool of yuan liquid. The yuan qi it contained was indeed enough to support the 5 elemental heaven ceiling formation against quasi-god San Nirvana's attacks for 1,000 years. However, if quasi-god San Nirvana didn't attack the 5 elemental heaven ceiling formation and instead directly destroyed the elemental yuan qi pools, the result would be different. As long as the elemental yuan qi pools were destroyed, the 5 elemental heaven ceiling formation would lose its source of power. It wouldn't take long for quasi-god San Nirvana to forcefully break through the 5 elemental heaven ceiling formation. Wei Qingxian, who had been paying attention to Yi Xing, immediately noticed the change in Yi Xing's expression and asked, "Yi Xing, do you have a solution?" Feng Hanqiu and Feng Junyue immediately looked at Yi Xing, their eyes filled with hope. Yi Xing nodded. "It's not difficult to break this formation." Feng Hanqiu looked excited. "How do we break the array?" Inside the 5 elemental heaven ceiling formation, Star Silver Death's expression changed slightly. Yi Xing's words made him feel a trace of fear. However, Star Silver Death was still very confident in the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation left behind by the founder of Celestial Elephant Palace. He immediately calmed his mind. Star Silver Death sneered. "You think it's easy to break the formation? Yi Xing, go ahead and attack. I want to see what kind of ability you have that you dare to speak so arrogantly and attempt to break the formation." Yi Xing drew the green sandalwood divine bow again, his eyes filled with confidence. "Then watch carefully." A pale white flame arrow rapidly condensed and took shape. Yi Xing placed the azure sandalwood divine bow at the bottom of the bow. The arrow was not aimed at the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation ahead, but the ground outside the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation. Wei Qingxian, Feng Hanqiu, and Feng Junyue all looked puzzled. However, Star Silver Death's expression changed drastically inside the 5-colored light shield. Of course, Star Silver Death knew that the power source of the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation was the 5 elements pool beneath the ground. However, the 5 elements pool was hundreds of miles underground. Even if someone cultivated an eye technique and had powerful eyesight that could see through 1 or 2 layers of objects, what kind of eye technique could see through hundreds of miles of dirt and sand? Star Silver Death had never heard of such an eye technique. However, Yi Xing's arrow was aimed at the ground of the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation. This shocked Star Silver Death. Maybe he's only guessing that the power source of the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation is underground, and he hasn't really seen it, so he's just attacking randomly? Star Silver Death guessed. This was the only way he could feel relieved. If Yi Xing was just attacking randomly, Star Silver Death would be much calmer. The 5 elements pool was connected to the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation. It wouldn't be that easy to destroy it. If he attacked the 5 elements pool directly, no matter which pool it would have the defensive power of the 5 elements heaven ceiling formation. However, the connecting channels between the 5 elements pools were the weakest. Even a quasi-god of Nirvana 2 could break through it without the attack of a quasi-god of Nirvana 3. The 5 elements pools were connected by 5 channels, which formed a 5-pointed star. The 5 elements pools were the 5 corners of the 5-pointed star. Compared to the 5 elements pools, which were 30 miles in length, width, and height, the 5 connecting channels were very small. They were only about 1 meter in diameter. If he attacked randomly, it was unlikely that he would be able to hit the connecting channels that were only 1 meter in diameter. However, The reality was the exact opposite of what Star Silver Death had guessed. The 5 connecting passages could be said to be the 5 flaws of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation. Yi Xing's void-breaking god eyes could see them clearly. The target of the flaming arrow was also locked onto one of the connecting passages. Yi Xing released the bowstring. The flaming arrow left the bowstring instantly and shot into the ground. The resistance of the ground was more than 10 times stronger than that of air. However, the flaming arrow's penetrative power was terrifying. It only took 1 breath for it to travel 100 miles underground. The flaming arrow made a turn underground, bypassing the defense above the 5 elements pool. It shot to the bottom of the 5 elements pool, then turned upward and shot into one of the connecting channels. The ground shook violently. The 5-colored light shield of the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation shook violently. With one of the connecting channels broken, the balance between the 5 elements pools was broken. The 5 elements heaven-sealing formation was immediately affected. Wei Qingxian, Feng Hanqiu, and Feng Junyue were overjoyed. It seemed that Yi Xing's attack was very effective. In the 5-colored light shield, Star Silver Death's face turned pale instantly. He was controlling the formation. How could he not know that the balance of the 5 elements pool was broken? Beside him, Xing Yuehong's face was not any better. She looked anxious. If the 5 elements heaven-sealing formation was broken, Xianxia Palace would be destroyed. She and Xing Yuehong would not be able to escape. Yi Xing's Sagittarius and Vermilion Bird constellations appeared above his head. He held the Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow in his hand and used the Azure Flame Void-destroying arrow technique. He shot another arrow into the ground. The ground shook again. The 5-colored light shield shook violently again. Another connecting channel was broken by the flaming arrow. Yi Xing shot an arrow every 2 breaths. In just 10 breaths, he shot 5 arrows consecutively. All the connecting channels between the 5 elements pools were destroyed. Rumble, the ground shook violently. With the 5 channels destroyed, the 5 elements pools lost their balance and began to collapse. The tremors were more than 10 times greater than before. Rays of light rushed out from the ground. They were white, green, black, red, and yellow. They represented the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth elements chi. The 5 elements pool was too rich. At this moment, the eruption created gullies that were hundreds of miles deep in the ground. The range of the 5 elements chi was hundreds of miles. The 5 elements heaven-sealing formation above suffered the greatest impact. It shook violently and seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Yi Xing and the other 3 retreated hundreds of miles away. They quietly watched the 5 elements chi erupt. In the 5-colored light shield, Xing Yuehong and Xing Yuehong's faces were pale. They were filled with despair. Chapter 888. Hearing how Wei Qingxian addressed him, Yi Xing immediately understood the identity of the blurry man in front of him. Wei Qingxuan's father was naturally reincarnation supremacy. Yi Xing had heard Wei Qingxian mention him many times, but he had never seen him. Although he didn't even see reincarnation supremacy's appearance clearly today, Yi Xing finally had an understanding of how terrifying a supremacy was. Wei Qingxian said happily, "Father, are you here to take us to Reincarnation Palace?" Reincarnation supremacy shook his head. "I'm here to take you. With your aptitude, you will be in great danger in a high-level continent. Only in Reincarnation Palace can I protect you." Wei Qingxian was stunned and grabbed Yi Xing's hand. "Yi Xing and I are together. How can I leave Yi Xing alone? Father, take Yi Xing to Reincarnation Palace too. His aptitude is very good, and his strength is even stronger than Xian'er's." Yi Xing also held Wei Qingxuan's hand tightly. He had never felt that there would be any obstacles between him and Wei Qingxian, but now he realized that Wei Qingxian was the daughter of a supremacy. Reincarnation supremacy might not take a fancy to a little genius king like him. Many true god experts had appeared in the Dark Star continent, but no one had ever heard of a true god becoming a supremacy. It could be seen that even a true god expert was nothing in the eyes of a supremacy. Yi Xing was an 8-star emperor, but he had the strength of a second nirvana quasi-god. It was indeed heaven-defying. If a true god expert knew about it, they would have to look at him in a new light. However, it was far from enough to catch the eye of a supremacy. As Yi Xing expected, reincarnation supremacy glanced at him. He felt that his whole body was seen through, but reincarnation supremacy didn't show any special expression. 5-star blue fate, vermilion bird constellation, proficient in archery, has the blood essence of a true god of archery in his body, and also has a rank 6 fire seed. His combat power is no weaker than a 1 nirvana quasi-god. Except for the Sagittarius constellation and the Black Hole constellation, everything about Yi Xing was revealed by reincarnation supremacy. He will be a supreme expert among the quasi-gods in the future, but it will be difficult for him to become a true god. His achievements will be limited. Xian, his aptitude is worlds apart from yours. He is not worthy of you. To the reincarnation supremacy, even a true god was nothing. However, to be able to become the strongest among the quasi-gods, one's achievements were indeed limited. In the reincarnation palace, there were a lot of true gods and countless quasi-gods. There was no difference between having a supreme expert among the quasi-gods and not having one. Seeing that reincarnation supremacy looked down on Yi Xing, Wei Qingxian immediately became anxious. "Father, you are wrong. Yi Xing has the paramount constellation and has the strength to kill a second nirvana quasi-god. Yi Xing's potential is not inferior to Xian'er's. Furthermore, Xian'er has already become partners with Yi Xing. Father, don't separate us." Reincarnation supremacy said, "Xian'er, I sent you to a lower continent to let you experience the difficulties of martial arts, not to let you fall in love. Your mother lost her life to save you. I need you to focus on martial arts and become a supremacy. Only then can you join hands with me to save your mother's life. He is only a 5-star blue fate, and it will be difficult for him to become a true god in the future. His lifespan is only a few thousand years. Even if he has the paramount constellation, what's the use? As for you, if you become a true god, you will have a lifespan of 30,000 years. If you become a supremacy, your lifespan will be eternal. At that time, what kind of partner can't you find?" With a wave of reincarnation supremacy's hand, Yi Xing and Wei Qingxian separated. Yi Xing wanted to move, but he couldn't. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't open his mouth. The supremacy's methods were mysterious. Now, apart from being able to see and think, he was no different from a statue. Wei Qingxian saw this and said in shock, "Father, what did you do to Yi Xing? My heart already belongs to him. Even if I have a long lifespan, I won't like anyone else. Yi Xing and I have a promise to reach the peak of martial arts and become supremacies together. Father, don't hurt him." Become supremacies together? Reincarnation supremacy seemed to be moved and laughed. Does he really have such ambitions? Wei Qingxian nodded. Yi Xing found that the shackles on his body had disappeared and nodded again and again. Reincarnation supremacy said, "Young man, becoming a supremacy is not something that can be done with words. You have built a top-grade imperial body and have a supreme celestial form. You do have the qualifications to become a supremacy, but your chances of becoming a true god are not high. Becoming a supremacy, Do you know how many true gods have wanted to become a supremacy since ancient times, but they couldn't take this step?" Yi Xing said, "If there is a will, there is a way. Whether it can be done or not, we will only know if we persevere. Senior, this junior doesn't ask Senior to take me to the reincarnation palace, but I beg Senior to tell me the location of the reincarnation palace and how to get there. In the future, I will go there with my own ability. At that time, Senior will not stop me and Qingxian." There were only 3 high-level continents in the flowing light world. The Dark Star Temple, the Radiance Temple, and the Star River Temple were the 3 strongest forces. The Reincarnation Palace was definitely not in the flowing light world. It was unknown how far it was from here. Yi Xing had become a 9-star king. He could go to the Heavenly Bao continent and obtain Luo Tiangong's inheritance. He could enter the Star Secret Realm and explore the treasures left behind by the Star Supremacy. If reincarnation supremacy took him to the reincarnation palace now, it would be difficult for him to come back. Therefore, Yixing was unwilling to be taken away by reincarnation supremacy. Haha. Reincarnation supremacy laughed. He pointed his hand and a message shot into Yixing's mind. Young man, you talk big. However, it's not that easy to go to the reincarnation palace. If you can really go there with your own ability, I will do as you say and allow you to interact with Xianxia. Let's go. As soon as reincarnation supremacy finished speaking, he waved his hand. His and Wei Qingxuan's figures gradually turned illusory. They left the space passage and disappeared. Yixing, I'll wait for you. Only Wei Qingxuan's voice was still echoing. As soon as reincarnation supremacy left, the space passage immediately returned to its normal state. The still void torrent moved instantly and traveled hundreds of millions of miles in a breath. Yixing moved forward with the void torrent, but his mind was focused on the message left behind by reincarnation supremacy. As Yixing expected, the reincarnation palace was indeed not in the flowing light world. It was located in the center of the reincarnation region, the reincarnation world. This world was made up of many worlds. It was called the Black Cloud World. In the Black Cloud World, one person had 3,000 worlds. The flowing light world was only one of the 3,000 worlds. There were more than 200 worlds nearby that belonged to the reincarnation region. The reincarnation palace was the most powerful force in the reincarnation region. It was called the Reincarnation Holy Land. Reincarnation supremacy was the most powerful person in the reincarnation region. In the reincarnation region, every world had a teleportation formation that led to the reincarnation world. However, the distance between the worlds was extremely far. It was countless times farther than the distance between the continents in the starry sky. The space passage formed by the teleportation formation was very chaotic. Only real God experts could withstand it. Therefore, if one wanted to leave the world through the teleportation formation, one must at least have the strength of a real God expert. Chapter 889. The Strength of a True God Expert. Yixing sighed inwardly. His current strength was stronger than a second Nirvana quasi-god, but his attack power was only at the level of a third Nirvana quasi-god. However, if he really fought with a third Nirvana quasi-god, he would definitely lose. After all, strength was not only in terms of attack power, but also in terms of defense, reaction, and so on. The difference in strength between each realm of quasi-god was huge, especially between a sixth Nirvana quasi-god and a true God expert. It was like a natural chasm. Yixing still had a long way to go to reach the level of a true god. Not long after, Yixing reached the end of the space passage and was repelled by the void torrent. He appeared in the sky above a 10,000-foot-tall mountain. He had arrived at the Dark Star continent. Yixing looked back and could not see the space passage. Even with his god eye of void piercing, he could only see a tiny point in space. This was a space passage that could only be entered but not returned. Unless one had the strength of a true God expert, one could break the rules and travel in reverse between the starry star continents. Qingxian, wait for me. I will definitely go to the Samsara Palace to find you. Wei Qingxuan's figure flashed across Yixing's mind. The god eye of void piercing pierced through the void. Yixing confirmed the direction, and the azure cloud wings appeared on his back as he sped away. The Dark Star continent was more than 10 times larger than the Starry Crescent Land. It was extremely vast. The last time he went from the Starry Crescent Land to the Dark Star continent, he took the void-crossing divine boat, which could teleport tens of thousands of miles in a breath. That was why he could reach the Dark Star Temple so quickly. Yixing did not have such speed. If he wanted to go to the Dark Star Temple, he had to use the nearby transmission formation. About 1,000,000 miles away, Yixing saw a huge city and flew toward it at a speed of 1,000 miles in a breath. A little more than 15 minutes later, Yixing arrived at the big city called Shui City. Shui City was vast, with a radius of 10,000 miles. Other than the 3,000 miles around the center of the city that was protected by a formation, the rest of the area was not protected by a formation. Yixing flew directly into the sky above Shui City, heading towards the teleportation hall in the city. Stop! As soon as Yi Xing entered Shui City, a loud roar could be heard. A 9-star martial monarch flew out from somewhere in the city and blocked Yi Xing's path. Yi Xing stopped more than 100 miles away and asked, "What's the matter?" In the sky above Shui City, other than the central region's array formation, there were also other cultivators flying. It was clear that Shui City did not prohibit flying. Yi Xing asked himself if he had violated any city rules. The 9-star Great Emperor looked greedily at the azure cloud wings on Yi Xing's back. What a great flying artifact! It can actually allow an 8-star monarch's speed to reach such a level. He's much faster than an ordinary quasi-god. Yi Xing snorted. The other party was actually coveting his azure cloud wings and wanted him to stop. The 9-star martial monarch shifted his gaze from the blue cloud wings to Yi Xing's face and asked, "Who are you?" Yi Xing coldly glanced at the other party. "What does it have to do with you?" The 9-star martial monarch chuckled. "I am Shui Mang, a member of the Shui family in Shui City. Master Shui has taken a fancy to your flying artifact. I'll give you 100,000 high-grade crystals." "Not for sale." Yi Xing spat out 2 words. He turned into a ray of light and instantly went around Shui Mang. Shui Mang was furious. "Stop right there." Yi Xing arrived above the teleportation hall in a few breaths. He descended and treated Shui Mang, who was chasing behind him, as air. Entering the teleportation hall, Yi Xing handed over 100,000 high-grade crystals and immediately ordered, "Teleport to the Dark Star Divine Palace." The Dark Star Divine Palace was the strongest force in the Dark Star continent. The Dark Star dynasty behind it ruled the entire Dark Star continent. Hearing this, the array master in the hall did not dare to delay and quickly adjusted the array formation. At this moment, Shui Mang arrived at the teleportation hall and barged in aggressively. "Master Shui asked you to stop and you still dare to run? Do you want to die?" The moment he entered the teleportation hall, Shui Mang's figure flashed and rushed toward Yi Xing. As he spoke, he threw a punch at Yi Xing's face. Boom! The void trembled and the air exploded. The martial artists in the teleportation hall were shocked. However, when they saw that the one who threw the punch was Shui Mang, they were enlightened. The Shui family was the ruler of Shui City. Shui Mang was only a martial monarch and not a quasi-god, but he was a direct descendant of the Shui family. He was the son of a direct descendant of the Shui family. In Shui City, even a quasi-god would not dare to offend this master. However, the array master who adjusted the array formation for Yi Xing knew that Yi Xing was going to the Dark Star Divine Palace. He probably had a powerful background. "Master Shui." They wanted to warn Shui Mang, but it was too late. Just as they spoke, Shui Mang's fist had already reached Yi Xing's face. A mere 9-star martial monarch dared to be so arrogant in front of him. Yi Xing snorted and pointed a finger. The finger was like an arrow, instantly hitting Shui Mang's fist. The energy around the fist was penetrated by the arrow, and the sharp arrow pierced his fist. Shui Mang immediately felt a sharp pain as if he had been electrocuted. With a miserable groan, his fist went limp. Bang! At this time, Yi Xing kicked out. The energy footprint hit Shui Mang's stomach, and Shui Mang was immediately sent flying out of the teleportation hall. A breath later, Shui Mang rushed in again. He pointed at Yi Xing and shouted, "You dare to attack me in Shui City?" Yi Xing's gaze was sharp. "Oh, you're a little 9-star martial monarch. Could it be that you're the king of Shui City? You don't even care about the Dark Star Divine Palace?" Dark Star Divine Palace? Shui Mang was stunned. Yi Xing wasn't wearing the Dark Star Divine Palace's disciple robe, so he didn't think that Yi Xing was a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace. The Dark Star Divine Palace had only recently recruited disciples 15 years ago. It was impossible for a new disciple to reach the 8th level of Astral Sea Realm so quickly. If it was an old disciple who had a flying divine tool, he definitely wouldn't be an ordinary disciple. He should have cultivated for more than 100 years and shouldn't still be in the 8th level of Astral Sea Realm. Shui Mang had secretly judged that Yi Xing wasn't a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace, which was why he dared to target the Azure Cloud Wings. However, he didn't know that Yixing was an exception among the outer disciples of the Dark Star Divine Palace. He had been in the Dark Star Divine Palace for 15 years, but he had only stayed in the Dark Star Divine Palace for a year. After that, he had traveled to several space continents and outer space continents. Fortuitous encounters came one after another. In just 15 years, he had already reached the 8th level of Astral Sea Realm. Xue Meng said angrily, "Are you trying to scare Master Meng? What kind of Dark Star Divine Palace disciple are you?" As he spoke, Xue Meng looked at the array master who was adjusting Yixing's array. Stop for Master Meng. Don't let this brat go. When my Xue family's quasi-god arrives, we'll make him suffer. Yixing took out the Dark Star Divine Palace's disciple token. Your Xue city's Xue family doesn't put the Dark Star Divine Palace in your eyes? The Xue family had Xue Inen, a true god expert. As an inner elder of the Dark Star Divine Palace, they were indeed a prominent force in the Dark Star continent. However, even so, the Xue family was only an ordinary 5-star family. There was a world of difference between them and the Dark Star Divine Palace. How would the Xue family's disciples dare to look down on the Dark Star Divine Palace's disciples? After taking out the token, Yixing's identity was naturally confirmed. Xue Meng left dejectedly. Yixing returned to the Dark Star Divine Palace through the teleportation array. Chapter 890. In the Dark Star Divine Palace, Yixing returned to the 10th peak. 15 years had passed, and many of the outer disciples had become 4-star kings. Some were even 5-star kings and had become inner disciples. Most of the outer disciples had become 3-star kings. Only half of them were left. The disciples from the Starry Crescent Land who were originally 2-star and 3-star kings had all broken through to become inner disciples. Even Feng Xiaoxiao, who was originally an 8-star king, had broken through to become a 4-star king 3 years ago and became an inner disciple. Mo Qingyang, the peak master of the 10th peak, met Yixing. Good. You are indeed the top disciple of the 10th peak. Since you have not returned from the Heavenly Bao continent, I knew that you had obtained Luo Tiangong's treasure and would have a bright future. I did not expect you to become an 8-star king in just 15 years. You really surprised me. Among all the outer disciples of the 10th peak, Zhuo Fifan from the 7th peak had the fastest cultivation breakthrough. However, he is only a 6-star king now. Although more than half of the outer disciples of the 10th peak had become inner disciples, none of them had become advanced kings. However, Yixing was an 8-star king. In comparison, Yixing's cultivation was indeed special. He had improved at a godly speed. More importantly, the other disciples were all cultivating in the Dark Star Divine Palace. They had returned from the Heavenly Bao continent with a large number of contribution points and abundant resources. Yixing's cultivation had improved so quickly in the Starry Crescent Land, which was a low-level continent, and then in the Starry Crescent Land, which was a middle-level continent. As the peak master of the 10th peak, Mo Qingyang was, of course, happy that Yixing had come out of the 10th peak. He personally brought Yixing to the inner disciples. In the future, when Yixing achieved something, he, the peak master of the 10th peak, would also be proud. The inner disciples of the Dark Star Divine Palace were much more complicated than the outer disciples. The outer disciples would recruit disciples from the Dark Star Land every 50 years and from the middle-level continents every 100 years. Once these outer disciples became 4-star kings, they would be transferred to the inner disciples. Batches after batches of outer disciples transferred to the inner disciples. Only a small number of them became quasi-gods and became core disciples. The rest stayed in the inner disciples. Everyone under 1,000 years old was a disciple. After 1,000 years of accumulation, there were 20 batches of outer sect disciples gathered in one place. Naturally, there were hundreds of thousands of people. After collecting the inner disciple identity card and clothes, Yixing asked Mo Qingyang, "Peak Master Qingyang, is there a good place in the Dark Star Divine Palace where I can raise my cultivation quickly?" Mo Qingyang knew that since Yixing had become an 8-star king at such a young age, he was definitely going to break through to the quasi-god realm. In the future, He even wanted to break through to the true God realm. The earlier he broke through to quasi-God, the greater his potential and the greater his chances of becoming a true god in the future. Therefore, raising one's cultivation level was of utmost importance to martial artists. Mo Qingyang recommended a place to Yixing. Regarding the Dark Star Godly Palace, the Star Origin Pagoda is the best place to increase one's cultivation base. There is a level 7 energy gathering array at the bottom of the Star Origin Pagoda, which gathers the Star Origin Qi between heaven and earth into the Star Origin Pagoda. The first level of the Star Origin Pagoda can double the cultivation effect, the second level can double the cultivation effect, and the third level can triple the cultivation effect. Upon hearing this, Yixing was delighted. The third level of the Star Origin Pagoda is indeed very effective. Given the abundance of Star Origin Qi in the Dark Star continent, he would only need a dozen years to break through to the 9-star Great Emperor realm. If he could raise his cultivation effect by 3 times on the third level of the Star Origin Pagoda, he would only need 3 to 4 years to break through, which was enough to shorten the time by 10 years. Mo Qingyang chuckled, "Of course." However, the third level of the Star Origin Pagoda is not a place that anyone can enter as they wish. There is only one cultivation room on the third level, which can only sustain one person's cultivation. Yixing was surprised as he asked, "Only one person can cultivate? Then who should go?" Mo Qingyang said, "Of course it should be the first inner disciple. This is the benefit of the first inner disciple. The first inner disciple can cultivate for a month. On the first day of every month, the other disciples can challenge the first inner disciple. The winner will be the new first and can enter the third level of the Star Origin Pagoda to cultivate. On the first day of the next month, they will have to accept challenges from other disciples." The first inner disciple was a 9th-level Astral Sea Realm cultivator. No matter how strong he was and how unrivaled he was among the kings, Yixing was confident that he could defeat him. Yixing's expression became restless. The first day of every month? There are still 3 days before the first day of the next month. I have to give it a try. Mo Qingyang said, "There are many inner disciples. It is not easy to stand out." The first level of the Star Origin Pagoda can accommodate 1 person, the second level can accommodate 10 people, and the third level can accommodate 100 people. Only the top 101st will be qualified to cultivate in the Star Origin Pagoda. When Yixing was at the 9th star Venerate Lord, he defeated a 3-star king and became the first disciple of the 10th peak. Mo Qingyang knew that Yixing was very strong and had the ability to challenge those of a higher cultivation level. However, most of the outer disciples from the last 20 batches of inner disciples were stuck at the 9-star king level and had yet to become a quasi-god. They had been stuck at the 9-star king level for a long time, some for 100 years, and some for a few hundred years. It was difficult for their cultivation to improve, so they could only improve their strength. Those who could rank among the top among the hundreds of thousands of inner disciples all had extraordinary strength. It was not an exaggeration to say that even the 100th inner disciple was far stronger than an ordinary 9-star peak king. On the Dark Star continent, many 9-star kings were at the top of their peers. However, when compared to the inner court disciples of the Dark Star Temple, they were no match for the inner court disciples who were ranked 100th in the inner court. As for the top 10 inner disciples, they were even stronger. They were unrivaled in the same cultivation level. Even if 10 9-star kings worked together, they would not be a match for them. Those who could rank first were even more terrifying. Those who could rank first among the hundreds of thousands of inner disciples were almost invincible except for quasi-gods. Even the top inner disciple of the Dark Star Temple had managed to defeat a quasi-god before. For example, the current temple master, the Divine Emperor, had ranked first among the inner disciples for a few years. He was so strong that even a second Nirvana quasi-god was no match for him. Many core disciples were embarrassed by him. Although Mo Qingyang knew that Yixing had outstanding ability to challenge those of a higher cultivation level, he did not expect that Yixing would become the top inner disciple. In his opinion, it was good enough that Yixing could enter the top 101 and cultivate in the Star Origin Pagoda. It would be best if he could enter the top 10. 3 days passed in a flash. There were too few people in the Dark Star Temple who knew Yixing. His addition did not cause any ripples. During these 3 days, Yixing met with Feng Xiaoxiao, Zhuo Fifan, and other familiar people and passed the days peacefully. On the first day of every month, all the disciples were qualified to challenge the disciples cultivating in the Star Origin Pagoda. Yixing issued a challenge to the current top inner disciple, Kong Peng. Chapter 891. On this day, the challenge platform of the Dark Star Temple was very lively. On the huge square, there were 9 challenge platforms where battles were going on at the same time. The first to start were the disciples on the 3rd floor of the Star Origin Pagoda, who were ranked 12th to 101st on the inner disciple ranking. They were challenged by other inner disciples. The 3rd floor of the Star Origin Pagoda had a total of 100 cultivation rooms. The disciples who challenged the 3rd floor were weaker than the disciples on the 1st and 2nd floors. Therefore, the number of challenges on the 3rd floor was the highest. However, although there were many challengers, only a few were able to win. Kings had cultivated for more than 100 years and their cultivation base was solidified. It was difficult for them to continue improving their strength. The disciples who could rank in the top 100 were all outstanding. The rest of the disciples were no match for them in the past and would find it difficult to be their match in the future. More than 2 hours later, the challenges on the 3rd floor were over. After hundreds of battles, more than 90% of the challengers were defeated. Only a few people successfully entered the top 101st to obtain the qualification to cultivate in the Star Origin Pagoda. With their aptitude, it was impossible for them to cross the Nirvana tribulation and become a quasi-god even if they cultivated normally for 1,000 years. However, cultivating in the Star Origin Pagoda was faster and there was still a glimmer of hope. Therefore, all the inner disciples were scrambling for the Star Origin Pagoda. After the challenges on the 3rd floor were over, it was time for the challenges on the 2nd floor. The disciples on the 2nd floor were ranked 2nd to 11th. Their strength was 1 level higher than the top 100 disciples. The number of disciples who dared to challenge them was much fewer. In total, only 7 disciples challenged the disciples on the 2nd floor. Moreover, these 7 disciples were the best among the disciples on the 3rd floor. They were in the top 20 on the inner disciple ranking. After 7 battles, only the 12th disciple won and replaced the 11th disciple to enter the 2nd floor of the Star Origin Pagoda. After the challenges on the 2nd floor were over, the disciples who were watching the battles instinctively left. In addition to the genius disciples of the previous batch who had become quasi-gods, the title of the first inner disciple fell on Kong Peng 10 years ago. In these 10 years, Kong Peng had faced countless challenges but had never been defeated. His strength was far beyond the 2nd disciple. In the entire inner sect, no one could compete with him. A few years ago, the top 10 disciples were brave enough to challenge Kong Peng. However, after repeated failures, they gave up. In the last 2 years, Kong Peng did not face a single challenge. Therefore, all the disciples instinctively thought that once the 2nd floor's challenge was over, the day's challenge would be over. A figure appeared on the stage. This person was dressed in black and looked to be in his 30s. He was tall and had a terrifying aura. Many inner court disciples exclaimed in surprise. The one who stepped onto the stage was actually the number 1 inner court disciple, Kong Peng. Kong Peng went up on stage. Didn't this mean that someone wanted to challenge him? Who was this person? All the inner disciples were guessing. Kong Peng's gaze swept across the disciples like a sharp knife. Yixing, who challenged me, show yourself. Yixing? When the inner disciples heard this name, they began to ponder over it, only to realize that they didn't recognize it. Yixing had only stayed on the 10th peak of the Dark Star Sacred Palace for a year, so the inner disciples didn't know him. Even the disciples who had entered the inner court from the outer court did not think of Yixing. After all, there had been no news of Yixing for 15 years. Moreover, the number 1 inner court disciple was extremely powerful. However, Zhuo Fifan, who had the highest cultivation after entering the inner court, was only a 6-star king. He hadn't stepped onto the stage of the inner court yet. Of course, They didn't realize that the Yi Xing that Kong Ping mentioned was the number 1 outer court disciple of the 10th peak, Yi Xing Wush. As soon as Kong Ping finished speaking, a figure flashed and appeared on the stage. It was Yi Xing. Seeing Yi Xing, all the disciples were surprised. They had never seen this inner court disciple before. Apparently, he was a nobody. It was really shocking that he dared to challenge the number 1 inner court disciple, Kong Ping. As for the outer court disciples who had entered the inner court, many of them were elites who had entered the Heavenly Bao continent. They recognized Yi Xing and were even more shocked. Yi Xing had not returned from the Heavenly Bao continent for 15 years. Now, he suddenly appeared and dared to challenge the number 1 inner court disciple. Kong Peng's sharp eyes immediately locked on Yi Xing. He stared at Yi Xing for a while and said, "Hey, nobody dares to challenge me, Kong Peng. Boy, you're a new disciple, right? Do you know the rules?" The number 1 inner court disciple had great benefits. Everyone wanted this position. However, no one dared to challenge the number 1 inner court disciple just because they wanted it. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of inner court disciples would challenge Kong Peng. Kong Peng would be exhausted to death. In order to prevent the top-ranked disciples from encountering too many unnecessary challenges, the Dark Star Divine Palace set up a rule and gave the challenged disciples the right to teach the challenging disciples a serious lesson without harming their lives. With this rule, disciples who were not powerful would not dare to challenge others casually. Otherwise, they would be beaten so badly that they would not be able to get out of bed for half a month. Yi Xing was a nobody. Kong Peng did not know that there was an inner court disciple like him. He guessed that he must be a new disciple who did not know the rules. Most of the inner court disciples thought so too. Someone shouted, "Nobody dares to challenge Senior Kong Peng. Isn't he courting death? Senior Kong Peng, teach him a serious lesson so that he will remember." Yi Xing met Kong Peng's sharp eyes and smiled casually. "Can't a nobody challenge you? Besides, I'm a nobody now. However, if I defeat you, I'll be famous." Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp aura exploded from Yi Xing's body. His energy shot up to the sky and the wind and clouds receded. Yi Xing's aura was comparable to that of a quasi-god. It was surging to the extreme. Kong Peng was shocked. His aura could not be compared to Yi Xing, an 8-star king. Whoosh! A beam of starlight shot up to the sky. Kong Peng used his astral aspect. It was an extreme wind element astral aspect. Yi Xing used his astral aspect at the same time. It was the Saint-grade vermilion bird aspect. Its power was even stronger and suppressed Kong Peng. Kong Peng was even more shocked. His aura and astral aspect were suppressed by Yi Xing. This was out of his expectations. However, Kong Peng snorted and a pair of low-grade divine weapon gloves appeared in his hands. The Kong family was a 5-star family on the Dark Star continent. The old ancestor of the family was a true god expert and an inner court elder of the Dark Star Divine Palace. Kong Peng's status in the Kong family was not low. He was also the number 1 inner court disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace. The Kong family rewarded him with a low-grade divine weapon, which was the gloves. "You don't have a divine weapon, right?" Kong Peng snorted in his heart. His figure flashed and turned into afterimages as he charged toward Yi Xing. Chapter 892. Yi Xing raised his hand, and the middle-grade divine weapon, Azure Sandalwood Divine Bow, appeared in his hand. Using the Azure Flame Void Annihilation Arrow art, Yi Xing swung the bow, creating a pale white shadow of a flaming bow, filled with violent power. Boom! Kong Peng's phantom was useless in front of Yi Xing. The flaming bow accurately hit Kong Peng's real body, blocking his attack. Yi Xing was as immovable as a mountain, not moving at all. On the other hand, Kong Peng was shocked as if he had suffered a heavy blow. His body shot backward, landing on the ground and retreating continuously. In the blink of an eye, he had retreated to the edge of the stage, almost being blasted off the stage by Yi Xing. The exchange between the two seemed to take a long time, but it actually happened in an instant. As the number 1 inner disciple, Kong Peng's strength couldn't be said to be weak. If a quasi-god didn't appear, no one would be his match. Even a 9-star king of the same realm would find it difficult to take a single blow from him. However, Yixing's strength was far beyond a 9-star king's, even if he didn't use the black hole astrology or Sagittarius constellation. Kong Peng naturally wasn't his match. This result was not only beyond Kong Peng's expectations, but also the inner disciples. Although Yixing's cultivation was only at the 8th level of the astral sea realm, his strength was heaven-defying. What shocked Kong Peng even more was the azure sandalwood divine bow in Yixing's hand. He said in a shocked voice, "Mid-grade divine weapon?" His only sense of superiority was the divine weapon in his hand, which was extremely rare among inner disciples. He didn't expect that Yixing's divine weapon was also a level higher than his. The divine weapon in his hand was actually a mid-grade divine weapon. Whether it was aura, astrology, divine weapon, or strength, Kong Peng was completely suppressed by Yixing. Only his cultivation was higher than Yixing's by 1 level. However, he couldn't do anything else other than having a higher cultivation by 1 level. This made him seem even more cowardly. Kong Peng's fighting spirit immediately plummeted. In front of Yixing, he was only left with an inferiority complex. "Remember, I am Yixing, titled Arrow Emperor." Yixing shouted loudly. His figure was like a ray of light as he instantly appeared in front of Kong Peng. He swept the azure sandalwood divine bow horizontally, and another flaming bow shadow shot out. The speed of the flaming bow was too fast, exceeding the limits of a king's reaction. Kong Peng couldn't dodge at all, and could only raise his palm to block. Bang! The flaming bow struck Kong Peng's palms, and with a loud bang, Kong Peng spat out a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying off the stage. Yixing won easily. The inner disciples looked at each other in shock. They had expected this battle to end very quickly, and one side would win easily. However, they had thought that Kong Peng would win easily, but in the end, it was Yixing who won easily. An 8-star king, an unknown new disciple, had actually defeated Kong Peng and become the #1 inner disciple. This result was very difficult for the inner disciples to accept. Some of them had cultivated for more than 100 years, while others had cultivated for hundreds of years. Many of them had stopped at the 9th level of the Star Sea realm, but they couldn't compare to a new disciple who had entered the sect for 15 years and was only an 8-star king. However, regardless of whether they felt good or not, Kong Peng had been defeated. Even Kong Peng wasn't a match for Yixing, so they naturally weren't a match for him. Yixing was originally a nobody, but now, everyone knew his name and remembered his title of Arrow Emperor. Of course, many disciples who cultivated the Tao of archery didn't like the title of Arrow Emperor. Immediately, a disciple who cultivated the Tao of archery started to make things difficult for Yixing. "How dare you give yourself the title of Arrow Emperor? You really have guts. Do you think that you are invincible among the kings of archery and that no one is a match for you?" The title of Arrow Emperor was given by Wei Qingxian, and Yixing liked it very much. Now that Wei Qingxian wasn't by his side, Yixing missed her very much. Since it was given by Wei Qingxian, Yixing would naturally maintain the title given by Yixing. Yixing's eyes were like lightning as he looked at that inner disciple and said coldly, "I am the Arrow Emperor. If you don't like it, come and fight me." That disciple's neck shrank. He was in the top 50 of the inner disciple rankings, and was far from the top 10. How would he dare to fight with the #1 inner disciple, Yixing? Yixing's gaze swept across all the inner disciples. "I am the Arrow Emperor. If anyone doesn't like it, you can come and fight me." When they met Yixing's gaze, all the inner disciples lowered their heads. Kong Peng was already strong enough, and no one in the inner disciples could match him. As an archery martial artist, Yixing had defeated Kong Peng with just a wave of his bow. Everyone could see that Yixing's strength was far superior to Kong Peng's. Who would dare to fight with Yixing? "Little king, what big words!" A cold shout came from afar. The voice was filled with disdain and resentment, and there was also a terrifying aura. Whoosh! As soon as the voice finished speaking, a beam of light streaked across the sky and stopped in the air, revealing a young figure. This person was walking on air and could fly in the air above the inner disciples. He was a quasi-god. All the disciples looked at the young man in the air. Many of them cupped their fists and bowed. "Greetings, senior brother Xueying. Kong Peng was the same. He had a respectful expression when facing this senior brother Xueying. Xueying was a first nirvana quasi-god and a core disciple. His status was much higher than that of the inner disciples. Yi Xing looked at Xueying with a calm expression. Senior brother, my title is the Arrow Emperor. I don't think I'll get in your way, right? Xueying stared at Yi Xing, his eyes filled with killing intent. Your bullshit title has nothing to do with this god. However, you killed my younger brother, Xuezi. This god has to settle the score with you. Xuezi. This was a name that had been buried in the depths of Yi Xing's memory. If no one mentioned it, Yi Xing would not even think about it. In the Heavenly Bao continent, Xuezi had chased after Yi Xing but was killed by Yi Xing. Only Hu Yanlong had seen this with her eye technique. Later, Yi Xing had killed Hu Yanlong with a void-piercing arrow. However, Hu Yanlong had told the other disciples that Yi Xing had killed Xuezi. It seemed like one of the disciples had told the Xue family about this. Yi Xing would never admit that Hu Yanlong, who had seen him kill Xuezi, was dead. He said, Senior brother Xueying, you're mistaken. When did I kill Xuezi? Xueying's eyes were fierce. Hu Yanlong saw it with her own eyes. Although Hu Yanlong is dead, she is my younger brother's fiancée. She would never lie about the cause of my brother's death. Yi Xing, you killed a fellow disciple in the Heavenly Bao continent. This is a capital offense. Today, this god will take your life as an offering to my younger brother's soul in heaven. Xueying killed without hesitation. He activated his Saint-tier demonic wind star form and took out a low-grade divine weapon. Heavenly Wind Demonic Sword Art. Xueying formed a sword art with his hands. The low-grade divine weapon shone brightly and shot out a terrifying demonic sword light. It fell from the sky and slashed at Yi Xing outside the challenge stage. The inner disciples were shocked. They did not expect Xueying to kill someone in the Dark Star God Palace. They retreated in all directions. However, they remembered that Xueying was avenging his younger brother. Many disciples could understand Xueying's emotions. However, Yi Xing, who had just won the first place, was in trouble. In the eyes of the inner disciples, once a quasi-god was angry, Yi Xing would definitely die. Chapter 893. To think that Xueying would actually try to kill him in front of so many people. This action was beyond Yi Xing's expectations. However, if Xueying really killed Yi Xing, although it was against the rules of the palace, killing a fellow disciple in public would have a huge impact and he would not be able to avoid punishment. However, as a core disciple, Xueying's status was much higher than that of an inner disciple, and he was eager to avenge his brother. If he was willing, he would probably be pardoned from the death penalty and would only suffer some punishment. Because of this, Xueying dared to kill him in front of so many people. If he captured Yi Xing and let the disciplinary hall sentence Yi Xing would insist that he did not kill Xuezi. In the Heavenly Bao continent, he had broken the restrictions of the Heavenly Bao Hall and allowed the Dark Star Temple to obtain a large number of god-tier treasures. He had made a great contribution. If there was no conclusive evidence and only some rumors, there would be no way to convict him. However, if Yi Xing died, there would be no way to prove whether he had killed Xuezi. There was no proof. Of course, Xueying wanted to kill Yi Xing on the spot. The baleful wind star form made the baleful sword light as fast as lightning. It only took an instant for it to appear and fall. No one believed that Yi Xing would be able to dodge this attack, and no one believed that he would be able to block it. However, Yi Xing's speed was not something that an ordinary quasi-god could compare to. When Xueying took out the divine sword, Yi Xing immediately attached arrow will to his body. The azure cloud wings appeared on his back, and he instantly traveled through the void. The baleful sword light slashed at the challenge platform. Yi Xing's figure instantly appeared 100 miles away, standing in the void. Yi Xing traveled through the void so quickly that the inner disciples did not notice that Yi Xing had left the challenge platform in the blink of an eye. However, as a quasi-god, Xueying was extremely sensitive to the fluctuations of the void. He clearly knew that Yi Xing had dodged the sword. One breath later, Yi Xing was already several hundred li away from Shueying, standing at the same height. In the inner sanctum of the Dark Star Divine Palace, the Forbidden Flight Array could restrict martial artists below the quasi-god realm from flying more than 30 meters above the ground. However, it could not restrict Yi Xing. Although he was an 8-star king, his mastery of 3 great daos of heaven and earth had reached the minor completion realm. His mastery of arrow intent was at the peak of the space-binding realm. The aura he exuded was even stronger than that of an average quasi-god. Moreover, the azure cloud wings were already a divine artifact and a divine-grade flying treasure. It had the ability to shatter the restrictions of the void. Even though Yi Xing was only an 8-star king, he could still fly 30 meters above the ground. Shui Ying's pupils shrank. He attributed Yi Xing's speed and Yi Xing's ability to fly 30 meters above the ground to the flying artifact behind him. The value of a divine artifact was comparable to a mid-grade divine artifact. It was an extremely precious treasure to a quasi-god. Shui Ying wanted nothing, but Yi Xing did. This caused Shui Ying's killing intent to soar. If he killed Yi Xing and obtained Yi Xing's belongings, it was not impossible. As long as the disciplinary hall did not require him to hand over Yi Xing's belongings, they would naturally belong to him. Die! Shui Ying roared. With a single step, he covered several hundred li. His low-grade divine sword carried a terrifying sword baleful astral light as it shot forward. Almost in the blink of an eye, Yi Xing was once again faced with a fatal attack. It was only when Shui Ying charged at Yi Xing again that the inner disciples realized that Yi Xing had dodged the attack. Their faces were filled with shock. Yi Xing did not dodge Shui Ying's attack. He had already drawn the azure sandalwood divine bow and condensed a pale white flame arrow. The moment the sword baleful astral light shot out, Yi Xing released the bowstring and the flame arrow shot out. Boom! The flame arrow collided with the sword baleful astral light, releasing a heaven-shaking explosion. A terrifying destructive ripple spread out from the point of explosion in all directions like a ball. The shockwaves from the clash of quasi-gods were simply too great. The formations of the Dark Star Sacred Hall immediately reacted and activated on their own, suppressing the destructive shockwaves. Otherwise, the shockwaves alone would have been enough to shatter the earth and topple the mountains. With a loud explosion, the sword baleful astral light was destroyed layer by layer. The flame arrow pierced through the sword baleful astral light and continued to shoot toward Shui Ying. The inner disciples couldn't help but rub their eyes. In this exchange, Yi Xing was actually the stronger one? Shui Ying hurriedly recalled his divine sword. After the flame arrow pierced through the sword baleful astral light, its strength was greatly weakened and Shui Ying blocked it with his sword. Even so, the terrifying strength still forced Shui Ying back 100 meters. Shui Ying was flabbergasted. He had never imagined that Yi Xing's archery would be so powerful that it was even a level higher than his. It was on par with an attack from a quasi-god of Nirvana, who, just as Shui Ying was panicking, an invisible strength suddenly descended and locked onto Shui Ying. The void around him instantly froze. The blue sandalwood divine bow condensed a pale white flame arrow once more. It locked onto Yi Xing and a powerful spatial binding force enveloped Shui Ying. Whoosh! The flame arrow instantly left the bow and shot out, piercing through the void. Shui Ying erupted his strength to the limit and barely managed to break free from the spatial binding force. He didn't have time to dodge, so he could only use the Big Dipper Fiend's sword art to resist. Bang! The sword baleful astral light was instantly scattered and the flame arrow pierced through Shui Ying's left arm. Shui Ying immediately screamed out in pain and was sent flying back several thousand meters. In the blink of an eye, the left arm that was struck by the flame arrow was completely pulverized. Even the flesh and blood couldn't be stopped. It wasn't until a breath of time later that the terrifying strength dissipated and Shui Ying's left arm regrew. But his vitality had been consumed by 20 to 30%. This left Shui Ying panic-stricken. Whoosh! Shui Ying followed the strength of this arrow and quickly fled. He didn't dare to stay. With Yi Xing's archery skills, several arrows would be enough to take his life. Yi Xing didn't chase after him. Ying wanted to kill him because he wanted to take revenge for his little brother. If Yixing killed Ying, it would at most be considered revenge. He wouldn't be able to escape the death penalty, so he could only teach Ying a lesson. Otherwise, the arrow just now wouldn't have hit his arm, but his head or body. That arrow would have consumed all of his life force, and he would have died in a single shot. The inner court disciples all looked at Yixing, dumbfounded. Yixing had actually defeated Ying and forced Ying to flee. In the Dark Star Divine Palace, an inner court disciple defeating a core disciple hadn't happened for a full 600 years. After a brief moment of shock, the inner court disciples began to discuss. An inner court disciple defeating a core disciple. Since Shui Baotong from 600 years ago, this hasn't happened again. I really didn't expect Yixing to have such heaven-defying strength. He's only an 8-star king, but not even a 1-nirvana quasi-god is his match. 600 years ago, Shui Baotong was able to defeat a 1-nirvana quasi-god and was already at the peak of the 9th level of the astral sea realm. Yixing is only an 8-star king, so he's even more heaven-defying. An 8-star king defeating a 1-nirvana quasi-god hasn't happened for tens of thousands of years. 10,000 years ago, when the Divine Emperor was still an inner court disciple, an 8-star king defeated a 1-nirvana quasi-god. Chapter 894. The battle between Yixing and Ying had caused such a huge commotion that even the array formations of the Dark Star Divine Palace were triggered, so it naturally attracted the attention of the upper echelons. The main peak of the Dark Star Divine Palace was more than 10,000 feet tall, and its peak pierced through the clouds like a paradise. At the top of the main peak was a magnificent palace that was both the main hall of the Dark Star Divine Palace and the Imperial Palace of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. In a room behind the main hall, the Dark Star Emperor, True God Dark Arrow, sat with a book in his hand. He withdrew his gaze from the inner sect of the Dark Star Divine Palace. Next to True God Dark Arrow was a middle-aged eunuch. He had a respectful expression, but his eyes were fierce. He was clearly an expert. True God Dark Arrow was tall and straight. Even sitting, he was still as imposing as a mountain. He put down the book in his hand and said, "Gao Man, bring that disciple called Yixing here." "Yes, Divine Emperor." Gao Man bowed and disappeared from the room like the wind. True God Dark Arrow's gaze fell on the book in front of him. There were 5 ancient words on the cover of the book: Astral Shift. True God Dark Arrow raised his hand and rubbed his head, sighing. The art of yin and yang, reversing the universe, shifting the stars, changing the heavens. It's truly mysterious. It's a pity that this emperor can obtain such a wondrous art, but this emperor can't find the person with the supreme astral form. Sigh. Dark Star Divine Palace, Inner Sect. A group of deacons from the Hall of Penal Laws arrived above the Inner Sect. The deacons of the Hall of Penal Laws were all quasi-gods, and the leader was a quasi-god of 4 nirvana. The quasi-gods all gave off monstrous auras. The quasi-god 4 nirvana locked his gaze on Yixing and roared, "Let's go." Inner sect disciple Yixing has disrespected the rules of the palace and injured core disciple Ying. The Hall Master of Penal Laws has ordered us to capture Yixing. Yixing, surrender. Yixing frowned slightly. He knew that if he killed Ying, there would definitely be no way out. He didn't expect that just injuring Ying would alert the punishment hall. Senior brother Ying was clearly the one who wanted to kill senior brother Yixing, and senior brother Yixing was forced to fight back. Why did the Hall of Beheadings arrest senior brother Yixing instead? Immediately, the inner disciples began to discuss among themselves. In the beginning, they were hostile towards Yixing, a nameless junior who challenged Kong Peng. Even though Yixing defeated Kong Peng, most of the inner disciples refused to accept him. However, when Yixing defeated the core disciple Ying, the inner disciples' attitude changed. An inner disciple defeating a core disciple was a great honor, and the inner disciples were proud of it. Of course, they would stand on Yixing's side. When the quasi-god 4 Nirvana saw that Yixing wasn't moving, he barked, "Yixing, why aren't you surrendering? Do you want us to make a move?" Yi Xing knew that since he refused a toast, he would have to drink a forfeit. In any case, he hadn't done anything wrong and had performed meritorious deeds for the Dark Star Temple. The punishment hall upheld the rules of the Dark Star Temple and wouldn't allow anyone to distort the truth, so it didn't matter if he went to the punishment hall. Yi Xing said, "I'll go with you." At this moment, an invisible ripple spread out, causing everyone's hearts to tremble as they felt a terrifying pressure. The quasi-gods in charge of the punishment hall all fell from the sky and landed on the ground, leaving only Yi Xing standing in the air. Besides Yi Xing, there was also a middle-aged man with a pale face and no beard. He was none other than Gao Man, the eunuch who served the Dark Star Emperor. In front of the Dark Star Emperor, Gao Man's head was lowered and his expression respectful, but at this moment, he was puffing out his chest and looking down on everyone. The quasi-gods of the punishment hall and the countless inner sect disciples were all ignored by Gao Man. His gaze was fixed on Yi Xing alone. "By the Divine Emperor's decree, I summon Yi Xing for an audience." Without waiting for Yi Xing's reply or consent, Gao Man waved his hand. Yi Xing felt the world turn upside down as he and Gao Man vanished from the sky. The quasi-gods in charge of the punishment hall and the inner sect disciples stared at the empty sky, dumbfounded. On the Dark Star continent, there was only one divine emperor, and that was the Hall Master of the Dark Star Temple and the Emperor of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. His title was True God Dark Arrow. This Hall Master God Emperor was a legendary figure in the Dark Star Temple. He was a peerless genius who had broken countless records in the Dark Star Temple. His strength far surpassed that of the previous divine emperors. Under his leadership, the Dark Star Divine Kingdom, which had been the weakest of the three divine kingdoms in the flowing light world, had become the #1 faction. 10,000 years ago, when he was still a disciple of the Dark Star Temple, he had blossomed with incomparably resplendent light, sweeping through his peers and undergoing 9 nirvanas. 9,000 years ago, he ascended to the position of True God and took over the position of Hall Master and Divine Emperor. Even for True God experts, he was a rare figure in the Dark Star Temple. If they were not summoned, they could not meet him. For martial artists below the True God level, the Dark Star Emperor was a legend. Inner sect disciples had little hope of meeting a True God expert, let alone the Dark Star Emperor. Seeing that Yi Xing had been summoned by the Dark Star Emperor, they were naturally dumbfounded. When the void around Yi Xing returned to normal, he was already at the peak of the main peak of the Dark Star Temple. In front of him was an immortal palace surrounded by white clouds. It was boundless and ethereal, like a fairyland. "Let's go!" Tai Lon and Gao Man shouted softly and took the lead to enter the palace. Yi Xing followed closely, but his mind was racing. Why did the Dark Star Temple Master want to meet him? After thinking about it, it should have nothing to do with the Supreme Star Form. Others could not detect the Supreme Star Form. Even Reincarnation Sovereign could only see that Yi Xing had the Saint-level Vermilion Bird Star Form and did not see the Sagittarius Constellation or the Black Hole Star Form. The Dark Star Emperor was only a true god and naturally could not see it. Moreover, Yi Xing and the Dark Star Emperor had never met before, and the latter had never seen it before. Although I defeated Xue Ying and attracted the attention of a true god expert, the Dark Star Emperor is not an ordinary true god. It is unlikely that he would summon me because of this. There should be other reasons that attracted his attention. After thinking about it, it should be related to the Heavenly Bao continent. Luo Tiangong was also an expert at the limit of a true god. The treasures he left behind should not be limited to those in the Heavenly Bao Palace. As for me, I am related to the real treasures that Luo Tiangong left behind. Yi Xing thought quickly. In the blink of an eye, thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind, and he could only think of one possibility. After entering the Immortal Palace, Yi Xing's vision suddenly widened. He could not see the end of the palace in front of him, left and right. It was a vast expanse of whiteness. However, in front of him, left and right, there were 9 huge pillars that pierced the sky. This Immortal Palace was the same as the Starry Palace. It was a spatial treasure. There was another world in the palace, and it was not as big as it looked from the outside. At the end of the 2 rows of pillars, there was a table and chair that shone with golden light. It was suspended in the clouds above. A tall man sat on the golden chair, exuding endless power. This person must be the Dark Star Emperor. As expected, Gao Man entered the immortal palace and bowed to the tall man sitting on the golden chair. Reporting to the Emperor God, Yi Xing is here. Chapter 895. Yi Xing stepped forward and cupped his fists in a disciple's salute. Disciple Yi Xing greets the palace master and the divine emperor. The Dark Star Emperor had 2 identities. One was the palace master of the Dark Star Divine Palace, and the other was the divine emperor of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. In front of a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace, he was naturally the palace master. The disciple was addressed as the palace master and the divine emperor. He only needed to salute as a disciple. If he had finished his apprenticeship, he would need to salute as a subject. The Dark Star Emperor's eyes were like lightning. His gaze fell on Yi Xing, as if he had seen through Yi Xing. After looking for a while, the Dark Star Emperor nodded slightly. Not bad, not bad. The Dark Star Divine Palace hasn't had a genius disciple like you for a long time. You may rise. Yi Xing straightened his body. He was neither servile nor overbearing. If he had not seen the reincarnation sovereign, he would definitely be excited when he saw the Dark Star Emperor. However, Yi Xing had seen the martial Dao Supremes before. Although he did not see the other party's face clearly, he did meet him face to face and even spoke to him. Naturally, the excitement he felt towards the Dark Star Emperor decreased. It was like an ordinary person suddenly meeting a rank 1 high official. Naturally, he would be excited. If he met the Emperor first and then met a rank 1 high official, his excitement would naturally decrease. The Dark Star Emperor continued to size up Yi Xing. You broke the seal left by the Heavenly Bao True God in the Heavenly Bao Palace. The essence blood of the archery True God also flows in your body. It should have been left by the Heavenly Bao True God. It seems that you have obtained the inheritance of the Heavenly Bao Divine Palace and cultivated in seclusion for 15 years in order to achieve such achievements. Yi Xing nodded. The Palace Master and the Divine Emperor are wise. I have indeed obtained the recognition of the Heavenly Bao True God. However, I have not obtained all the inheritance of the Heavenly Bao True God. I have to wait until I become a 9-star king and enter the Heavenly Bao continent to obtain it. The Dark Star Emperor's expression was normal, but his tone was doubtful. If that's the case, why did you return to the Dark Star Divine Palace now? Wouldn't it be more convenient to cultivate to the level of a 9-star king and obtain all of True God Tiangong's inheritance? Yi Xing said, Disciple knows that the Dark Star Divine Palace has the Star Origin Pagoda, which can increase the cultivation speed of kings. Disciple will return to the Dark Star Divine Palace and become the number 1 inner disciple, which will greatly shorten the time needed to break through to the 9-star king realm. The Dark Star Emperor nodded his head slightly, agreeing with Yi Xing's reasoning. Yi Xing, as a disciple of the Dark Star Divine Palace, the Dark Star Divine Palace has brought you from a mid-tier continent to the Dark Star mainland, accepted you as a disciple, and nurtured you with great effort. Whatever you have gained in the Heavenly Bao continent is naturally your own luck. However, you cannot forget about the Dark Star Divine Palace behind you. Previously, when you unlocked the Heavenly Bao Palace's seal, you handed over 50% of your gains to the Dark Star Divine Palace. That was a good job, and the Dark Star Divine Palace's nurturing of you was not in vain. Yi Xing understood the meaning behind the Dark Star Emperor's words. He nodded his head and said, Disciple will remember the kindness of the Dark Star Divine Palace. The next time I enter the Heavenly Bao continent, I will still hand over 50% of all the inheritances of the Heavenly Bao True God to the Dark Star Divine Palace as a thank you for nurturing me. The Dark Star Emperor smiled slightly. Do you know that the Heavenly Bao True God had entered the Star Secret Realm and obtained a great opportunity? Yi Xing nodded his head in agreement. The Dark Star Emperor continued. The Star Secret Realm was left behind by the Supreme Being. All the items obtained from the Star Secret Realm are of great use to the Dark Star Divine Palace. If you obtain any treasures or inheritances related to the star secret realm in the Heavenly Bao continent, you are not allowed to hide them. Do you understand? Yi Xing said, "Disciple understands." The Dark Star Emperor waved his hand. "You may leave. Gao Man, send him back." "Yes, Emperor God." Disciple will take his leave. After the two of them finished speaking, Gao Man brought Yi Xing and walked out of the palace. The Dark Star Emperor flicked his finger and a dark shadow flew out. It was like a meteor piercing through the sky. It was unimaginably fast. In an instant, it entered Yi Xing's body from behind. Yi Xing did not notice it at all. When they were outside the palace, Gao Man used the void shift technique again. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xing was sent to the inner sanctum area. On the main peak of the Dark Star, in the Immortal Palace, the Dark Star Emperor revealed a smile at the corner of his mouth. He had hidden a part of his will of soul in Yi Xing's body. He could sense every move of Yi Xing clearly. When the Dark Star Emperor was young, he had also entered the Heavenly Bao continent. Other than a divine weapon, he had gained nothing. However, a disciple from a mid-level continent had actually obtained the inheritance of Luo Tiangong. This really puzzled the Dark Star Emperor. He had hidden a part of his will of soul in Yi Xing's body so that he could sense every move of Yi Xing at any time. When Yi Xing entered the Heavenly Bao continent again in the future, he could use his will of soul to sense everything that Yi Xing had experienced in the Heavenly Bao continent. After returning to the inner sanctum, Yi Xing went straight to the Star Origin Tower. Yi Xing did not lack divine weapons or divine weapons. The only thing he needed was the effect of the Star Origin Tower to speed up his cultivation. Now that he was the first in the inner sanctum, of course, he had to make good use of the benefits of being the first in the inner sanctum. He entered the third level of the Star Origin Tower to cultivate and increase his cultivation speed by 3 times. In the Dark Star Godly Palace, other than the outer sanctum and inner sanctum area, there was also the core area, the central area, and other places. It covered a vast area of more than 10,000 miles. The core area was where the inner sanctum elders and core disciples resided. Every inner sanctum elder had their own mountain, and the area of several hundred miles was their private territory. True Flame Peak was the mountain of the inner sanctum elder Shuang. He had dozens of quasi-god disciples under him. The Xue family martial artists who entered the Dark Star Godly Palace enjoyed the benefits of being in a favorable position. As long as they became quasi-gods, they would all become Xue Yinan's disciples. Xue Yinan had lived for more than 10,000 years, and his mentality was old. He did not care much about Xue Zi's death in the Heavenly Bao continent. However, the quasi-god disciples of the Xue family were still young, and they were very angry. Currently, there were 3 quasi-god disciples in the Dark Star Godly Palace: Xue Li, Xue Baotong, and Xue Ying. Among them, Xue Li was the oldest. He was already over 900 years old and was a 4th Nirvana quasi-god. Xue Baotong was over 600 years old and was a 5th Nirvana quasi-god. Xue Ying was over 100 years old and was a 1st Nirvana quasi-god. On the day that Yi Xing challenged Kong Peng, only Xue Ying was in the Dark Star Godly Palace. Now, Xue Li and Xue Baotong had received Xue Ying's message and returned to the Dark Star Godly Palace. Xue Zi was Xue Ying's younger brother, and Xue Ying was only 100 years old. He was very young, and could be said to be hot-blooded. Xue Ying was most concerned about Xue Zi's death. Xue Ying's killing intent towards Yi Xing was very strong. Huyan Long would not fabricate the cause of my brother's death. It must be Yi Xing who killed my brother. Furthermore, Huyan Long was killed by an arrow that suddenly appeared in the Heavenly Bao continent. It must be Yi Xing who killed him to silence him. Senior brothers, we cannot let this matter rest. Xue Li was more than 900 years old, and his mentality was the most balanced of the 3. He did not care much about Xue Zi's death. However, because of Xue Ying, he was implicated. Xue Li said, "If it was just an ordinary disciple, we could use some tricks to kill him." However, Yi Xing was summoned by the palace master Shenhuang. This is not ordinary. Besides the true god elders, how many people in the Dark Star Godly Palace have the fortune to meet the palace master Shenhuang? In my opinion, it's best not to offend the palace master Shenhuang. Chapter 896. The Palace Master Divine Emperor was a legend in the Dark Star Divine Palace. Yi Xing had been summoned by the Palace Master Divine Emperor. Shui Baotong was a genius among the quasi-god disciples, so he did not dare to go against the will of the Palace Master Divine Emperor. However, seeing how unwilling Shui Zi was, Shui Baotong knew that if Yi Xing did not die, Shui Ying would not be relieved. As members of the same clan and disciples under Shui Yinan, there was still some affection between them. Moreover, Yi Xing had killed a Shui family disciple, which made Shui Baotong unhappy. Shui Baotong thought for a moment and said, Yi Xing has been summoned by the Divine Emperor. It is impossible to kill him in the Dark Star Divine Palace. However, if he leaves the Dark Star Divine Palace, there is a chance that any martial artist will die outside. At that time, it is not impossible to kill him. Shui Ying's eyes lit up. That's right. If Yi Xing leaves the Dark Star Divine Palace, there will be a chance to kill him. At that time, I will have to rely on you too. On the third floor of the Star Origin Pagoda, the rich star Yuan-Chi was so condensed that it was visible to the naked eye. Inside, the star Yuan-Chi would drill into one's body even if one did not use a cultivation technique. If one used a cultivation technique, the star Yuan-Chi would be rapidly absorbed like a river. Yi Xing sat in the middle of the cultivation room, fully circulating the highest level of the mystic peak grade falling star art. His body was like a bottomless pit, crazily absorbing the star Yuan-Chi around him. The rich star Yuan-Chi gathered around Yi Xing, forming a vortex visible to the naked eye. Yi Xing's cultivation progressed by leaps and bounds. Time passed day after day. Soon, a month had passed. Yi Xing did not receive any challenge and continued to cultivate on the third floor of the Star Origin Pagoda. He would not give up until he became a 9-star king. Even quasi-god Shui Ying had been defeated by Yi Xing. This news had spread throughout the inner sect. Other than the disciples who hadn't ventured out yet, all the disciples of the Dark Star Divine Palace, regardless of whether they were inner, outer, or core disciples, knew about the Arrow Emperor Yi Xing's sect. Even the high and mighty true god powerhouses had heard of Yi Xing. After all, other than defeating Shui Ying, Yi Xing had also received an audience with the Divine Emperor. There was no doubt that the Arrow Emperor, Yi Xing, was the most famous person in the Dark Star Divine Palace during this period of time. Everyone knew who he was. Yi Xing's strength was so strong that the inner disciples only had a deep respect for him. No one dared to challenge him. After all, no inner disciple believed that they had the strength of a quasi-god. Therefore, Yi Xing did not need to leave the Star Essence Tower at the beginning of each month. If no one challenged him, he would still be ranked first in the inner sect and could continue to cultivate on the third floor. Time passed quickly. Month after month, year after year, Yi Xing remained on the third floor of the Star Essence Tower, cultivating in seclusion. Yi Xing refined and absorbed a huge amount of star Yuan-Chi, causing Yi Xing's cultivation base to continuously consolidate and improve. After more than 3 years of accumulation, Yi Xing's cultivation base finally reached the stage of breaking through the silkworm to become a butterfly, making a qualitative breakthrough. On this day, the star Yuan-Chi in the entire Star Essence Tower went berserk. Even outside the Star Essence Tower, countless star Yuan-Chi were attracted by an invisible force from all directions and gathered together. A huge star Yuan-Chi vortex appeared in the sky above the Star Essence Tower, hanging upside down like a funnel. An endless stream of star Yuan-Chi poured into the third floor of the Star Essence Tower. The cultivation room on the third floor was already filled with astral Yuan-Chi. Yi Xing was at the center of the astral Yuan-Chi. Not only his meridians, but even the billions of pores on his body were madly absorbing the astral Yuan-Chi, breaking through to the 9th level of the astral sea realm. The whole process lasted for an hour. The star Yuan-Chi vortex in the sky had thinned out and finally dissipated. However, a terrifying aura was emitted from the third floor of the Star Essence Tower. In the cultivation room on the third floor, Yi Xing stood up. His cultivation base had already broken through to the 9th level of the astral sea realm, becoming a 9-star king. In the starry crescent land, he was an existence worthy of being called an emperor. Yi Xing's astral wind had another qualitative breakthrough. When he was a 7-star king, he had already cultivated the black-level top-grade falling star incantation to the limit. The strength of his astral wind was no weaker than that of a 9-star king. Now, Yi Xing's astral wind continued to strengthen after 2 breakthroughs. Compared to a 9-star king's astral wind, the strength of his astral wind was 2 levels higher. It was almost comparable to that of a first Nirvana quasi-god who had already undergone the Nirvana tribulation. Yi Xing clenched his fist. He felt that every part of his body was filled with terrifying power. Every move of his was filled with a vast divine power that could move mountains and fill seas. After becoming a 9-star king, I can finally enter the heavenly Bao continent again and obtain all the inheritances of true God Tiangong. Furthermore, I can enter the star secret realm and search for the treasures left behind by the star sovereign. Yi Xing's mind spun. He was extremely happy. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. The Dark Star Emperor immediately sensed Yi Xing's breakthrough. Like Yi Xing, the Dark Star Emperor also revealed a look of joy. True God Tiangong was a legend in the flowing light world. He was the strongest among the true gods. Even the Star God Emperor was interested in all the inheritances left behind by true God Tiangong, especially when true God Tiangong had obtained a great opportunity in the Star Secret Realm. When the Dark Star Emperor was a 9-star king, he had also entered the Star Secret Realm but did not obtain much. The Dark Star Emperor had always wanted to know what kind of great opportunity true God Tiangong had obtained in the Star Secret Realm. Now, he finally had the hope of finding out. His soul would follow Yi Xing into the heavenly Bao continent. He would be able to sense everything that Yi Xing had experienced clearly. The Dark Star Emperor was like true God Tiangong in the past. He had stopped at the limit of a real god. He wanted to become a martial arts supremacy, but he did not even have a direction. He was anxious to know some secrets of the Star Secret Realm so that he could peek into the path of becoming a martial arts supremacy. After leaving the Star Origin Tower, Yi Xing met up with Feng Xiaoxiao and the other disciples from the Starry Crescent Land. In the past 3 years, many outer disciples had broken through and become inner disciples. Feng Xiaoxiao had even become a 6-star king. According to Feng Xiaoxiao, Zhuo Fifan had even broken through to become a 6-star king. He had become the first disciple in this batch of disciples, other than Yi Xing, to become a high king. Feng Xiaoxiao and Zhuo Fifan were the most outstanding geniuses among Yi Xing's batch of disciples. However, under Yi Xing's brilliance, they seemed to be overshadowed. In the teleportation hall of the Dark Star Divine Palace, there was a level 7 teleportation formation here. Its powerful energy was enough to teleport one to any area in the Dark Star continent. However, the level 7 teleportation formation consumed a lot of energy. Unless it was an emergency, the Dark Star Divine Palace would not activate it. Yi Xing left the Dark Star Divine Palace through the level 6 teleportation formation and arrived at the city closest to the entrance of the Heavenly Bao continent. Then, he continued to use the teleportation formation in the city to arrive at the entrance of the Heavenly Bao continent. Chapter 898. The Dark Star Emperor took a step forward and disappeared from the main peak's immortal palace, traveling through the void at an extremely fast speed. There was a huge gap between a quasi-god and a true god. Even a 6 Nirvana quasi-god could only travel tens of thousands of miles by teleporting through the void. A true god could teleport up to 1 billion miles away. An ultimate true god like the Dark Star Emperor could teleport up to 1 billion miles away. In other words, as long as the Dark Star Emperor was willing, he could teleport to any place in the Dark Star continent other than the sealed space. Moreover, he could teleport to anywhere he wanted. As for the sealed space, it was not something that could be teleported to. It had nothing to do with distance, such as the Star Secret Realm. Near the entrance of the Dark Star continent to the Heavenly Bao continent, Xue Baotong, Xue Li, and Xue Ying were shocked when Yi Xing said that the Emperor God was here. When they turned back to look, Yi Xing had used the black hole astrology and shrouded them in the world of darkness. Just as they were shocked, the sudden darkness shocked the three of them. They did not see that Yi Xing had used the astrology and thought that the Dark Star Emperor was really here. The sudden darkness was the Emperor God's doing. Therefore, when Yi Xing traveled through the world of darkness and went around them, the three of them did not react in time. In a breath's time, Yi Xing arrived near the entrance of the Heavenly Bow Continent. Usually, the void door to the Heavenly Bow Continent was hidden and could not be seen by martial artists. However, Yi Xing had the Heavenly Bow Order and could clearly sense the void door. He rushed into the void door directly. The black hole astrology in the sky disappeared immediately, and so did the world of darkness. While Xue Li and Xue Ying were still in shock, Xue Baotong realized that Yi Xing had disappeared. A spatial vortex appeared, and a terrifying pressure came out of it. In the blink of an eye, a person walked out of the spatial vortex. This person was tall, and he was dressed in a black brocade robe with 9 golden dragons embroidered on it. He wore a crown with 5 pearls on it. He was the divine emperor of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom, as well as the palace master of the Dark Star Divine Palace, True God Dark Arrow. As soon as the pressure came, Xue Baotong and the other two were pressed down to the ground from the sky. The terrifying pressure made it impossible for them to move. The Dark Star Emperor's divine eyes were like torches. Naturally, he could see the void gate that was hidden in the void. At this moment, his divine eyes were burning with rage. Yi Xing had the supreme astrology, but he had gone to the Heavenly Bow Continent through the void gate. He had left a wisp of soul will in Yi Xing's body, which was under his surveillance at all times. Yi Xing had escaped right under his nose. The Dark Star Emperor had asked Yi Xing to go to the Heavenly Bow Continent because he wanted to know what kind of opportunity true god Tiangong had obtained in the star's secret realm. His goal was to find a way to break through to the supreme level. However, he only needed to move Yi Xing's supreme astrology into his body. Then, it would be possible for him to become a supreme-level martial artist. If he had known that Yi Xing had the supreme astrology, he would not have asked Yi Xing to go to the Heavenly Bow Continent. Damn it. Damn it. So, this little guy has the supreme astrology. I have miscalculated. The Dark Star Emperor roared in his heart. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the hidden void gate. He slammed his palm down. Boom. The entire space collapsed. The void gate also shattered into nothingness. The terrifying power was transmitted through the space of the void gate and reached the distant Heavenly Bow Continent. The collapsed space was reformed under the rules of heaven and earth and returned to normal. However, the void gate that connected to the Heavenly Bow Continent had been destroyed and no longer appeared. The Dark Star Emperor retracted his palm and took a deep breath. After all, he was not an ordinary person. Even though he had lost his composure, it was only for a moment before he calmed down. The Dark Star Emperor thought to himself, although Yi Xing has entered the Heavenly Bow Continent and I can't do anything to him, he will return to the Dark Star Temple after obtaining the inheritance of true God Tiangong. Why should I be so agitated and destroy the passage that connects the Dark Star Continent and the Heavenly Bow Continent? Without this void gate, Yi Xing would not be able to return to the Dark Star Continent from the Heavenly Bow Continent. What should I do? The Dark Star Emperor blamed himself. It had been a long time since he had lost his composure. However, this was related to the supreme astrology and whether he could become a supreme martial artist. It was reasonable for the Dark Star Emperor to be agitated when he saw the opportunity slip through his fingers and reach a level that he could not control. Damn it. If I had known this would happen, I would have come here earlier. He would not have been able to escape from me. Damn it. The Dark Star Emperor regretted it very much. Then, the Dark Star Emperor waved his hand and shattered the void gate. His figure disappeared and he left the Dark Star Continent and headed to the starry sky where the Heavenly Bow Continent was. As for Xue Baotong and the other two, they were like 3 ants in the eyes of the Dark Star Emperor. From the beginning to the end, the Dark Star Emperor did not even look at them. It was only when the Dark Star Emperor left that Xue Baotong and the other two felt the invisible pressure disappear and their bodies regained their freedom. The three of them looked at each other and their faces were full of fear. The Dark Star Emperor shuttled through the Void Gate and teleported billions of miles in the blink of an eye. Soon he arrived in the vast starry sky. In front of him was a huge continent floating in the Void Gate. It was the Heavenly Bow Continent. Outside the Heavenly Bow Continent, there was a layer of translucent space barrier that enveloped the entire continent. It was a barrier that separated the continent from the starry sky. Only a true god powerhouse could forcefully pass through it and travel between the various starry sky continents and the extraterritorial starlands. However, the Heavenly Bow Continent was not an ordinary extraterritorial starland. True God Tiangong had set up a terrifying method here. The entire Heavenly Bow Continent was covered with a formation prohibition and it had its own set of rules. Even a true god powerhouse could not ignore this set of rules and forcefully enter the Heavenly Bow Continent. Unless one had absolute power and could destroy all the methods that true God Tiangong had left behind. Although Yi Xing would return to the Dark Star Continent after receiving true God Tiangong's inheritance, there was a possibility that other accidents would happen and he would never return. The Dark Star Emperor had been searching for the supreme astrology for thousands of years. Now that he had finally found one, he would not allow any accidents to happen. Therefore, the Dark Star Emperor decided to forcefully destroy the formation prohibition that true God Tiangong had left behind and enter the Heavenly Bow Continent to control Yi Xing whoosh. A ray of starlight shot up into the sky. The Dark Star Emperor had used his astrology. It was a huge star that was emitting moonlight. On the star, there was a huge wolf shadow that was howling at the sky, emitting a fierce aura. Saint-level astrology, heavenly wolf astrology. There were 3 types of saint-level astrology. One was an attribute type, such as the green dragon astrology, vermilion bird astrology, etc. One was a weapon type, such as the heavenly sword astrology, heavenly blade astrology, etc. One was a fierce star type, such as the heavenly wolf astrology, heavenly army destroyer astrology, etc. Chapter 899. When attribute astrology was combined with martial arts, it could greatly increase the power of martial arts. When weapon astrology was combined with weapons, it could greatly increase the power of martial arts. As for ominous star astrology, it could increase the power of both martial arts and attack. It was the most terrifying of all. Therefore, ominous stars were generally known as demon stars in troubled times. The appearance of one would be accompanied by a rain of blood. The Dark Star Emperor had experienced many bloody storms in his life. He wasn't a direct descendant of the Mo imperial clan, but a side branch. His status was inferior to that of the direct descendants. But among the direct descendants of the same generation, a peerless genius had appeared. His talent was monstrous, and he wasn't much inferior to the Dark Star Emperor. When the two of them were disciples of the Dark Star Emperor, they had progressed side by side, and their cultivations were equally matched. The Dark Star Emperor was only able to suppress his opponent in terms of battle prowess. At that time, the previous God Emperor had reached the end of his 30,000 years of life, and a new God Emperor had succeeded him. Although the Dark Star Emperor was able to suppress that direct descendant genius in terms of battle prowess, the majority of the true god powerhouses of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom supported that direct descendant genius as the next God Emperor. Although strength was respected in the world of martial arts, when two people's cultivation and strength weren't too different, their status would still have a great influence. This was especially true in a divine kingdom, where the importance of status was especially important. To that direct descendant genius, the existence of the Dark Star Emperor was always a threat. Therefore, he did everything he could to eliminate the Dark Star Emperor. The Dark Star Emperor's talent was monstrous, and he also had a group of supporters. Although they weren't as numerous as the direct descendant genius, they were all powerful people. With their protection and the Dark Star Emperor's strength, the Dark Star Emperor had managed to survive the schemes of that direct descendant genius time and time again. After the Dark Star Emperor underwent 9 nirvanas, the situation changed. His wings had fully grown, and he became the #1 expert of the Dark Star Divine Kingdom. Even the older generation of true gods were no match for him. He had far surpassed that direct descendant genius. In the competition for the position of Godly Emperor Dark Star personally ended the life of that direct descendant genius, killed more than 10 true gods who were loyal to that direct descendant genius, and annihilated dozens of 4-star and 5-star clans. In that bloody storm, who knows how many martial artists lost their lives. The birth of an ominous star, a rain of blood and a foul wind, ominous. This was definitely not a lie. It wasn't until the Dark Star Divine Emperor ascended to the position of Divine Emperor and became the supreme ruler of the Dark Star continent that the internal strife was completely quelled. However, they continued to fight with the Radiance Divine Nation and the Star River Divine Nation. After thousands of years of fighting, the Dark Star Divine Nation, which was ranked last, became the strongest force in the flowing light world. At this point, the Dark Star Emperor's life finally calmed down. However, he had been secretly searching for martial artists who possessed the supreme celestial form in order to take the final step and become a supreme martial artist. Outside the Heavenly Bow continent, the Dark Star Emperor, who had used the Sirius celestial form, exuded an extremely terrifying aura. The surrounding void was distorted endlessly, and the space collapsed. Destroy! God King Darkstar bellowed and struck out with his palm. The surging divine power turned into a giant hand that covered the sky. It was unknown how big it was, and it fiercely bombarded the space barrier outside the Heavenly Bow continent. Boom! A deafening sound rang out, and terrifying destructive ripples spread out, rushing thousands of miles away in the starry sky. The space barrier of the Heavenly Bow continent, even with the support of the formation set up by the Heavenly Bow True God, made cracking noises. In the blink of an eye, cracks appeared and continued to expand. The power of the Dark Star Emperor's palm was extremely terrifying and unstoppable. If it was not for the power of the formation set up by the Heavenly Bow True God, even the space barrier of the Heavenly Bow continent would not be able to stop him, let alone the space barrier of the Outer Star continent. Seeing that the space barrier of the Heavenly Bow continent was about to be destroyed by the Dark Star Emperor's palm, there was a sudden change in the sky above the Heavenly Bow continent. A terrifying aura appeared, and the space barrier emitted a dazzling light. A giant silver divine bow appeared, and there was a divine dragon roaring on the bow. The silver divine bow was pulled by an invisible force, and the bowstring was pulled, condensing into a giant arrow that was 100 miles long. The arrow left the bowstring in an instant, shooting through the void for 100,000 miles and hitting the giant hand. In an instant, the giant hand was torn into pieces. Silver Dragon Sky Shooting Bow. The Dark Star Emperor stared at the silver divine bow that was 100,000 miles away, and his gaze froze. Luo Tiangong, you're dead, and I'm not alive. It's really shocking that I can't compete with you. If you were still alive, you'd be a strong opponent of mine. It's hard to say who's stronger and who's weaker. However, you've been dead for 20,000 years, and you've only left behind some tricks. You want to stop me? You're delusional. As he spoke, the Dark Star Emperor raised his hand, and a green divine bow appeared in his hand. There seemed to be a wolf's soul in the green divine bow, and it was howling toward the sky. I have a top-grade divine bow too. Let's see if your silver dragon sky shooting bow is stronger, or if my Sirius moon howling bow is better. Sky Screen God Archery Skill. The Dark Star Emperor shouted loudly, and the Sirius moon howling bow was pulled into a full moon. A black arrow condensed, and the void in front of him suddenly turned dark. The entire void seemed to be covered by a curtain. The black arrow shot out explosively towards the Heavenly Bow mainland. The silver dragon sky shooting bow above the Heavenly Bow continent sensed it, and shot an arrow at the same time. The two arrows were more than 100,000 miles apart, but in the blink of an eye, they collided together. Boom, 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 boom. There were continuous explosions, and the space barrier outside the Heavenly Bow continent was the first to collapse. Then, layers of formations were destroyed. The silver dragon sky shooting bow was only activated by the power of the formation, but the Skywolf howling moon bow was used by the Dark Star Godly Emperor. Of course, The arrow shot by the Dark Star Godly Emperor was much more powerful than the Skywolf Howling Moonbow. After breaking the enemy's arrow, it also broke through several layers of formations. A smile appeared on the Dark Star Emperor's face. Unless True God Tiangong was still alive, no formation set up by True God Tiangong would be able to stop him. Although the Heavenly Bow continent was vast, and there were many formations and restrictions, the Dark Star Emperor was able to break through all of them. As long as he broke through a passage in the Heavenly Bow continent, the formations and restrictions of the Heavenly Bow continent would be completely divided into two halves, and there would be an imbalance. At most, the Heavenly Bow continent will cease to exist in one day. That little guy won't be able to escape from my palm. The Dark Star Emperor's lips curled up slightly, and he thought to himself. Yi Xing had just teleported to the Heavenly Bow continent when he felt the passage behind him collapse. Then, the Heavenly Bow order shone brightly, and it enveloped Yi Xing as he teleported through the void, and he appeared directly in the Heavenly Bow Palace. Ingui descended from the sky and landed in front of Yi Xing. He looked at Yi Xing excitedly. You've become a 9-star king? Chapter 902. Facing the Dark Star Emperor's arrogance, Godly Emperor Xing He and Godly Emperor Guang Guang could do nothing but feel indignant. The two of them looked at each other and prepared to leave. They did not want to stay here and watch the Dark Star Emperor suffer. Divine Emperor Dark Star suddenly stopped and said, "Wait a moment, you two." The Radiance Emperor was furious. He snorted coldly, "What? Do you want to keep us here?" The Dark Star Emperor retracted his disdainful expression and said seriously, "No, I'm asking for your help." The Dark Star Emperor would need close to a day's time to destroy the Heavenly Bow continent's formation by himself. Through the monitoring of his will of soul, he found out that Yi Xing would be heading to the Star Secret Realm in 6 hours' time. Obviously, this would cause the Dark Star Emperor to miss nothing. Since Yi Xing had entered the Star Mystery Realm, no one knew what would happen. The Dark Star Emperor naturally wanted to capture Yi Xing as soon as possible and control him. With his strength, even if he used all his trump cards, he would only be able to speed up the process by 2 to 4 hours. Therefore, he could only ask Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Guang for help. Seeing the change in the Dark Star Emperor's expression, the Godly Emperor Xing He and the Godly Emperor Guang Guang were slightly surprised. They thought to themselves, what is the reason for the Dark Star Emperor to be so impatient to break the Heavenly Bow mainland's forbidden formation? Naturally, the two of them could not guess. However, they were happy with the Dark Star Emperor's request. Godly Emperor Light sneered, "Dark Star Emperor, you'll need our help someday, hee hee." The implication was clear. You want me to help you? Dream on. Godly Emperor Xinghe smiled coldly. His expression was similar to Godly Emperor Radiance's. How could the Dark Star Emperor not know what the two of them were thinking? Although he despised the two of them, he did indeed need their help to break through the Heavenly Bow continent's restrictive spell and capture Yi Xing within 6 hours. Therefore, the Dark Star Emperor had no choice but to temporarily put down his pride. The Dark Star Emperor said, "I will give you a reward. If you help me break through the Heavenly Bow continent's restrictions as quickly as possible, each of you will receive a high-grade divine artifact." For true gods, the treasures they usually used were high-grade divine grade. Top-grade divine grade treasures were treasures that could only be chanced upon and not sought. In the 3 temples, they were the most important treasures. The superior divine treasure that the Dark Star Emperor had taken out was already the best treasure he could offer. As for the Temple Guardian treasure, he naturally couldn't give it to others. In the entire flowing light world, there were at least several hundred true gods. However, there were less than several hundred high-grade divine-level treasures. At least 20 to 30% of the true gods did not have a high-grade divine-level treasure. From this, one could see how precious a high-grade divine-level treasure was. However, Godly Emperor Xinghe and Godly Emperor Radiance weren't ordinary true gods. They were the godly emperors of their respective countries. They even had low divine-grade treasures, so why would they care about a high divine-grade treasure? Godly Emperor Radiance sneered, "A high-grade divine-level treasure? Are you trying to send a beggar away? Dark Star Emperor, you can have fun here. Just pretend that we were never here. Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xianxia looked at each other and were about to leave. The Dark Star Emperor said, 2 each. Even some true gods didn't have a high-grade divine level treasure. Although the Dark Star Emperor had more than one, it wouldn't be too many. 2 high-grade divine level treasures per person, that would be 4. It was a huge price to pay. However, Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xianxia weren't tempted. With a wave of their hands, the space in front of them shattered and they were about to teleport. The Dark Star Emperor shouted, 5 each. The Dark Star Emperor only had slightly more than 10 high-grade divine level treasures on him. Giving 5 to each of them meant giving away 10. Losing 90% of his treasures in an instant was akin to cutting his flesh and dripping blood. However, the Dark Star Emperor didn't even frown when he thought about capturing Yixing, obtaining the highest level of astrology, and having a chance to become a supreme. If he could become a supreme, what was a high-grade divine level treasure? The space vortex disappeared, but Godly Emperor Xianxia and Godly Emperor Radiance didn't disappear with it. Instead, they stopped their teleportation. 5 high-grade divine level treasures per person was enough to move them. Although high-grade divine level treasures didn't have any substantial effect on the 2 godly emperors, they were still godly emperors of their respective countries and hall masters. They had many true god experts under them, and many of them didn't have any high-grade divine level treasures. 5 high-grade divine level treasures were enough to equip 5 true gods, raising their strength to another level. Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xianxia exchanged a glance, then turned to the Dark Star Emperor at the same time. Give them the treasures first, then we'll act. The Dark Star Emperor waved his hand and 10 high-grade divine level treasures flew towards the 2 godly emperors. There were divine weapons, medicinal pills, forbidden weapons, all kinds of treasures. Godly Emperor Radiance and Godly Emperor Xianxia acted at the same time, snatching the most valuable treasures. In the blink of an eye, they each had 5 treasures. Godly Emperor Xianxia snorted. He was a bit slower than Godly Emperor Radiance, so the most valuable high-grade divine level medicinal pills were snatched away by Godly Emperor Radiance. The Dark Star Emperor only cared about giving out 10 high-grade divine level treasures. He didn't care how the 2 godly emperors divided the treasures. Seeing the 2 godly emperors take the treasures, he said, "Hurry up and act quickly. Don't take the rewards without doing anything. This emperor isn't that easy to fool. Go all out and break the formation as fast as you can." The higher the status of a cultivator, the more they cared about face. They would never break their promises. Godly Emperor Xianxia and Godly Emperor Radiance were godly emperors of their respective countries. They were even more particular. Since they had received their rewards, they naturally went all out. Godly Emperor Xianxia used the Saint-level Azure Dragon celestial aspect. He took out a high-grade divine spear and performed the high-grade divine martial art, Galaxy World-destroying spear technique. With a thrust of the spear, the space collapsed and the formation was broken. Godly Emperor Radiance used the Saint-level Saint Light celestial aspect. He took out a high-grade divine sword and performed the high-grade divine martial art, Radiance divine sword technique. The sword energy was like a ray of light. Wherever it passed, the space was cut into 2. Its breaking effect was even better than Godly Emperor Xianxia's. With the 3 godly emperors working together, the effect of breaking the formation was not as simple as 1 + 1 + 1. It was multiplied several times. In less than 6 hours, it was enough to destroy the entire Heavenly Bow Continent's formation. If the 3 of them went berserk, the time would be shortened by a lot. Godly Emperor Xianxia and Godly Emperor Radiance maintained their full strength. They didn't slack off, but they didn't go berserk either. On the other hand, the Dark Star Emperor was as fast as he could. He kept burning his divine energy and his strength was beyond his usual. In just about 3 hours, 70 to 80% of the Heavenly Bow Continent's formation had been broken. The rest would be destroyed in another hour. The Dark Star Emperor was overjoyed. If Yixing left the Heavenly Bow Continent after 6 hours, he wouldn't be able to escape from the Dark Star Emperor's grasp. However, what the Dark Star Emperor didn't expect was that after only an hour, Yixing had stopped cultivating. The star energy in his body had finished transforming. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.